what will happen today? Some talk first. So I'm going to give a talk, Sandy's going to give a talk, Hartlett's going to give a talk. They're all going to be short talks. Okay? We're all academics, and we know that academics do have this tendency to sort of gallop off into the distance while people go, what, somewhere behind them. If you think that's happening, just stop us, okay? We're trying to make sure that we put things in terms that people will understand, but researchers being researchers, occasionally we fail. So don't feel shy. If you think we're galloping off into the distance, go, whoa, and tell us just to stop them and explain things a bit more. When we've done the talks, we've got some hands-on upstairs. So Hartmut has produced some authoring software, and the idea is that, as the title of the event says, you make your own interactive story. And Hartmut software is what we're going to use to do that. So we have a room upstairs with a set of laptops, and we'll put you in pairs. And one of the reasons for doing the questionnaires is to try to make sure that we pair people up sensibly, because we know, of course, that you'll have a variety of experiences, different levels of computer literacy and all the rest of it. So we'll try and pair you up so that we don't put people in pairs where neither person is feeling very confident. And we'll get you started with the software as well. So Hartmut will give you tutorial support, so it shouldn't be too intimidating an experience. And there will be some biscuits partway through. Do not get crumbs in our keyboards. We will kill you. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the vision of interactive storytelling. So the vision, for those of you who are old enough to remember Star Trek, was the Star Trek holodeck. And in case you've never seen it, I'm going to explain what that was. So the holodeck is inside a big spaceship, and the idea was the spaceship was travelling around in space for years and years and years and years, and people were going to go stir crazy being stuck in this spaceship. So here's an enormous space in the centre of the spaceship called the holodeck, which in its raw state looks like that. Just a big grid of lines. But can have hollow stuff, holograms, projected into it, so that, for instance, it could look like that. So there's a jungle version of the holodeck. And as you'll see from my film clip in a minute, people, events, all sorts of things happen in the holodeck. What happens on the holodeck stays in the holodeck was one of the slogans of the series, and all sorts of things happened in the holodeck, as you'll see. All right, that's just film, isn't it? Who believes in that? Well, we have made some little bits of progress in that sort of direction. So we can now produce display environments that surround you, that make you feel as if you're located in the scene. This is an example of a tiled wall in an American installation, where you can have the whole city surrounding you. That may not look very compelling as a, do I really feel I'm there? Does it look like it? And here's another example, which I think perhaps gives you a better impression. This is somebody in a rather dome-shaped environment. You can just see this from his feet. You can see the circle at the bottom there. And the dome extends all the way around him, and that environment is being projected onto the inner surface of the dome. And I think you do get a very clear impression there that actually that could feel as if it was really happening around you. It's not holograms. They're not solid. You can't grasp them. Nevertheless, it's certainly a big step towards the hologram. Okay, so we can make some steps in that direction. There was the origin of the idea of interactive digital storytelling. Can we create something like the holodeck, where people feel it's almost real, and where they can act out interesting stories, where they're a protagonist, a participant, and the story is gripping and interesting and feels like a real story experience? Well, maybe. Let's have a look at an early attempt at this. The graphics in this are deliberately childlike. This is Crayon World. A cave is a square display system, which you can see there. Somebody's got, in fact in this case cabled, some glasses which allow them to see that environment in stereo, and a device which is that pink hand, and this is what they're seeing. So this is Crayon World. It's deliberately made to look like a child's crayon drawing, but you can wander around in it. And what you're seeing is what the person is seeing. So you're seeing their viewpoint. You can see the wobble as they move their head. You can see that pink thing, which is their hand, the butterflies on their hand. Because this is 3D, it sort of feels as if it fills the space around you. You can pick some flowers, like this. Oh yeah, they're crayon Latin flowers, but still quite interesting. I'm going to leave this until we get to my favourite bit, which is the bees. You can bash the bee's nest. well say to me, okay, but you can wander around and hit the bee's nest, but is there a story in there? And of course, that's not exactly what we meant, is it, when we thought about there being a story. So here's something that's more like it. Here we have a drama on the holodeck. So this is from Star Trek. And Jean-Luc Picard and his colleague are in the holodeck, are being chased by real baddies who are trying to get in. These are the real baddies.
I'm sorry, gentlemen, but we're closing. And you do understand we have a strict dress code, so you boys don't leave right now.
He's a hollow character. So, you know, they zap him, but there's nothing there really. He's a hologram.
Keep a nose. The ghost hasn't been here in months.
Ah. The character's
This is
gone.
the wrong chapter. Computer, begin chapter 30.
Try looks like having a good time.
No, look at me.
Try to act naturally.
There he is. Ruby, this is not a good time.
It's never the time for us, is it, Dix? Always some excuse. Some case you're working on?
I have to talk to Nikki. I'll see you later.
Okay. But watch your caboose. And dump the broad.
Well. Look what the cat dragged in. Quit shaking, Dix.
The usual, Nick. Martinis and scones. Excuse me.
Hey, I'm gonna take that personal in a second.
No offense.
Hey!
Okay, so that's a holodeck story, and you'll have to agree it's a bit more dramatic than the Crayon Land was. Okay, and I'll comment on this in a minute. Okay, but that's more like what we want, isn't it? We want something with that amount of drama, not a Crayon Land level of drama. That Crayon Land's fun for 5 minutes, but you can see you're going to get bored in there. There's no characters, there's no interaction, there's no story actually happening in there. But when we think about it, there's a bit of a crunch. So, the nice thing about these interactive environments is that you can do what you want. There's a character freely interacting with the world around them. So, Jean-Luc Picard could have chosen to go on with the original chapter and try to do something else about his baddies. If you'd been him, yeah, you might have chosen to go on with the original chapter. When that woman came up to him, you might have decided to have an interaction with her and not deal with the baddies. You might have had some other plan that didn't involve either chapter 12, the first one, or chapter 13, the second one, and have done that. All those choices were things that you might try. What you saw there was a film segment, which of course has a story because someone wrote it in advance. So if you were playing Jean-Luc Picard and you chose to do something that was different, well, what would happen then? So the interactive freedom somehow crashes with this idea that we'd like a story structure, some kind of dramatic structure. And they don't seem to meet very neatly in the middle. We wouldn't have got that nice dramatic structure if Jean-Luc Picard hadn't done all the things he did. That was a nice structure complete with zapping them down with this Tommy gun, which he happened to know was in the violin case. So it was all good stuff. So it's a bit problematic. So let me give you a further example. This involves a bit of role play by me. This is my prop. So I'm playing Robin Hood in Robin Hood and the Golden Arrow. For those of you who don't know this story, Robin Hood, anyone not heard of Robin Hood? Okay, Robin Hood, ancient English hero, lived in the greenwood. His foe is the Sheriff of Nottingham. He is a wonderfully adept person with a bow. He can split arrows by shooting other arrows at them, so he's absolutely wonderful. And this is a competition where he appears in Nottingham in front of his main enemy, the Sheriff, and wins the Golden Arrow prize. And he's in disguise. You should be able to see that from the picture. The eye patch is part of the disguise, and the big hat over the top is part of the disguise. And the idea is the Sheriff ain't going to recognise him. So I'm Robin Hood, right? And I'm now playing this in an interactive narrative. Sandy is the Sheriff of Nottingham, and over there is the target where I'm going to shoot my arrows, okay, win the Golden Arrow prize. And here I am standing here as Robin Hood thinking, right, I've got to shoot these arrows and win the prize. And I see my foe sitting over there, and I think, hang on a minute, I could shoot him instead. Right, boing, and he's dead. Oh dear, what's going to happen to the story now? You see, the story does kind of depend on us having a baddie, and I just shot him. He's dead in the first act. I completely destroyed the story structure by doing something that wasn't part of the plot. What can we do about this? Well, I could cheat, so I'm going to now shoot the arrow at Sheriff Nottingham. Boing! Oh, and it's missed. Right, I thought I was really good at arrows. Let me have another go. Boing! It's missed again. Something funny is going on here. None of them hit him. Oh, okay, the computer's not going to let me kill the Sheriff of Nottingham. Well, what kind of story is this? I can only do what the computer wants. That's the problem in a nutshell. How do we have a certain amount of freedom to do things while still getting some nice dramatic structure that doesn't allow us to wipe out the Sheriff of Nottingham or completely wreck the story by doing something like that? Well, here's one answer. Anyone ever read these? This is a choose-your-own-adventure book. I used to read these when my kids were into it. They were a bit after my time, but my kids used to buy these. And the idea is that you get a page of text, for anyone who's never seen this, and at the end of the page you get some choices. Do you do this? Go to page wherever. Do you do this? Go to page wherever. Yeah, so you go off to the different pages. You can cheat and go off to several of the pages and see what happens. And stick your fingers in. You run out of fingers eventually. They were quite good fun. So here's one way of dealing with the problem. We allow the user some choices, but only the choices we know about. This is called branching narrative, because we go out in different branches. You can see this from how it looks. So this is actually the diagram for the mystery of Chimney Rock. Now I know you can't see everything on that slide, it's too small, but you get the general idea. You start reading the book at the top, and it's got 36 endings. Cousins rich, almost rich, cat vanishes, suffocating closet, cop dies, narrow escape cave in, buried alive, witch dies, look back, die, don't look back, cat disappears. Okay? Okay, so yeah, that's a way round it. Some things to notice about this though. Those branches really form clusters, don't they? There's one there, one there, one there, one there, and one there. So there are 5 main clusters. A lot of the alternative endings happen quite close to the end of those clusters. So a lot of the choices are kind of irretrievable as well. There's one way of getting from up there, 2 ways, sorry, into here, over here. But broadly, otherwise, you're over there and that's it. You can't get back into any of these. So actually you have less choice than it looks. You don't have all of these choices because you make early choices up there and that takes you in one direction or another. You get quite different stories. Okay? And the other thing to think about is, yeah, just how complicated is this going to get if we want to make bigger stories? So what if it ends up looking like that? Okay. How are we going to keep track of this? Major authoring problem. Okay, so we can do this, and indeed computer games do this. One of the ways they cope with the explosion problem is to have branches which go out and then come back into the main storyline, and they don't have 36 endings, mostly. Sandy will be able to tell you because he plays games a lot more than I do, but 36 endings, I don't think so.
No.
2 or 3 endings, if you're lucky. And the choice is kind of an illusion. You branch out, you branch back in. it's a solution, but it ain't a good solution. So, you know researchers, you find something which looks like a solution but isn't that good a solution, off we go, trying to think of other ways of doing it. So the next bit is the researchy bit. Okay, we can do this, and we can author systems like this, and it is reasonable fun. We want structure. This is a typical structure for a 3-act drama. It's not the only structure in town, let me tell you. Hollywood films tend to look like this. You get the setup, the first turning point, the second turning point, a climax, the resolution. Yeah? French films, well, if anyone has seen a French film, they don't look like that typically. If you go to a French film thinking it's going to look like that, you're going to be disappointed badly. That's one way of looking at it. Here's another way we could look at it. This is the well-known structure for what's called the hero's journey. A lot of stories do look like this. So here's the hero up the top here, called to adventure, gets supernatural aid, there's some guardians. Try Lord of the Rings, okay? Does look a bit like this. Beginning of the transformation, challenges and temptations, abyss, death and rebirth, transformation, atonement. Sometimes you get a gift up there and then you go home. You could do Lord of the Rings like this, or The Hobbit. In fact, The Hobbit's classically rather like that, okay? And they're all good stories. We like those structures. We recognise them. So how are we going to get these structures without telling everyone all the time what they've got to do in this interactive environment? That's the basic problem. Well, we know that we can see around us in the world structures which haven't been set up by people deliberately. So nobody went out with a rake and made that sand dune look like that. Okay, the sand dune looks like that because of the interaction between the sand and the wind. In other words, that structure has formed spontaneously. We can see the same thing in water, of course. There's ripples interacting in water. Nobody has actually chivied the water into position there. That happens because of the way water is and the way ripples in it interact with each other and the way they interact with this thing at the bottom here. Okay? All right, you may say, fine, but what's that got to do with stories? That's just sand and water. Well, we can see it in living things as well. This is the centre of a sunflower. You see those lovely spiral patterns? Again, nobody has said the seeds must go in this nice pattern. That happens to be how the genetics and growth of sunflowers produce the centre of a sunflower head. There are lots of those around. And then you might say, yes, but sunflowers aren't going to play a very big role in the story, are they? Well, we can move up to living things. I assure you that geese do not have a little conclave before they take off, going, let's fly in a V, you can be at the point. That's a result of the interaction between geese and air, because the goose at the front is working hard, the geese behind are getting a bit of slipstream help. When the front goose gets tired, it will tend to fall back, so the arrow will reform with different people in it. So it's a dynamic arrow that flies across the sky, and it's entirely to do with the interaction between geese and air and how tired they are, and what that shape is. Even more complex shapes. Believe it or not, these are starlings. I don't know if you've ever seen these, phenomenal shapes. Dynamic shapes moving in the air, and again we can see structure in there. And that structure has nothing to do with the starlings having an agreement either. That's just the way that starlings react to each other when they're flying around. They avoid each other, they don't get too far from each other, they do particular shapes in the air. Fine, that's the living world. Well, how about doing this kind of thing on computers? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the game of life, and after demonstrating before we started that this wrecks my computer if I try to do it from here, I'm just going to leave here and actually show you this separately. So this is the amazing game of life, and it's explained to you in this video, and this video was kind of quiet, which is how the sound got turned down. showing here is it can get surprisingly complex things on computers from surprisingly simple rules. Well, how is this related to, there's another one. That one just oscillates, blinks. If you start from there, it just blinks. How is this related to stories? Well, by analogy, she says quickly, come on computer, do your stuff. How about a character-based narrative? Now that green cylinder is supposed to represent a story world. It could be a dungeon, it could be a spaceship, it could be a desert, it's wherever the story's happening. And those little things floating around are characters interacting with each other. Can you see the analogy here? I'm thinking of the characters as if they were the squares on the game of life. And I'm thinking of the patterns that form in the game of life as being narrative patterns. That we could make patterns like that which you feel were sort of stories. All right, you probably need a bit more. If you try and do this in real life, you normally have someone called a facilitator. And people do this kind of improvisation. You may do it if you ever have to do management training things, for instance, or educational role play. And what happens is the facilitator tells you at the beginning what your character is, what their story is, what their goals are, and also from time to time will cause external events, sort of kicking the jar, if you like, putting a bit of energy into the system. Soap operas are a little bit like this. So once upon a time, trying to remember what the soap was called. It was the farm one based in Yorkshire. Emmerdale Farm, that's right. At some point a plane crash wiped out the whole cast. That was a really big kick to the system, okay? So you see this in soap operas. Soap opera writers have this kind of thing in mind because they have to write stories which are like mini-stories, which are logical interactions between the characters. The advantage of this is that you don't get something like Robin Hood. See, Robin Hood was completely out of character when he missed the Sheriff of Nottingham. You couldn't believe in the Robin Hood character because a prime thing about Robin Hood is he could shoot straight. Yeah? In a character-based narrative, the characters do what the characters are supposed to do, which is an advantage. I told you it was research, so yeah, nice idea, but can it work? Well, we do have some examples with humans of this kind of thing. This is people doing tabletop role play. What's happening here is that a game master is setting up the scene and they're playing with tokens and bits of paper. And sometimes people play these games over years. They meet every week and they do an hour or two and their characters have good fun. And the game master isn't telling the characters what they have to do. The characters are deciding what to do and still having a satisfying story-like experience. All right, you might say, that's just every half an hour for years and they're all friends anyway. Well, look at this one. This is what's called live action role play. Here you go away for a weekend. Well, we did one of these that lasted an evening. And often in the real world, this is a bunch of Swedes. You can see are entering right into the spirit of the thing. They're in costume. And that thing behind is a piece of ex-World War II equipment which has been annexed to the story and is standing in for a spaceship in this case. So a lot of their action is going to take place in there. They're just giving you a shot of everyone involved. And these again can work. You get a satisfying story experience. The one we ran for an evening, 3 or 4 hours, was set in an inn near Calais during the French Revolution. And I think all of the people who played that would say they had an interesting story experience. People are people, of course, and computer characters are computer characters, and that's why it's difficult. People are much better than anything you can find on a computer. But that's a vision, and I'm here to give you visions as well as actuals. So the vision is something like this. Instead of there being one story, there's a story landscape. And whichever direction you go in the story landscape, you get something that feels like a story. None of this, I've shot the Sheriff of Nottingham, there is no more story. That's the vision.